Great. I'm Professor Green, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Chapter 2, Part 2. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll put us into slideshow mode here. So what is organizational structure? Structure is the way people work how they're organized and coordinated. And for most of you, I think this is pretty straightforward. You're familiar with how things come together within an organization. And organizational charts is a big focus of this section. It determines how the work is done and how people engage together across different departments. And some organizations, in my experience, it's sometimes hard to find an organizational chart. And for me personally, I find that frustrating. Some organizations feel that it's not important to issue an organizational chart, or it's hard to issue an organizational chart because it's so big and people are changing roles all the time. But it really is the right thing to do, obviously, so that everybody knows who reports to who and how the departments work together. So the structure, as we say here, is the skeleton of an organization, and it literally provides the backbone from which all the other elements are built. So the structuring process, division of labor and job descriptions, right? So before you even interview for a job, you need to have, or you should have a job description. My neighbor asked me if I had an intern for her interior design business, and I first said, I need to get a job description from you, right? Because then everyone's on the same page as to what she needs and what the student is going to expect out of the opportunity. Jobs are then arranged into work groups and departments. And if you have ever been unclear in a job as to who you report to, you'll see that it becomes actually hard to work because you don't really know what your priorities are and what are the priorities of your boss are. So just really important, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased because I teach organizational behavior, but just really important to have that clear black and white who's reporting to who. And so this all comes together, as I said, in an organizational chart. Here's a typical organizational chart. Line relationships. Those are people who we're going to talk about in a minute, contribute to the work, and then the staff relationships are the people who support those line relationships. And this is for a large university. So if you work at LMU, this looks familiar to you. Then how to read an organizational chart. Maybe it's pretty straightforward, but I love to read them and I find them so interesting. I kind of analyze them for a few minutes always. Obviously, the reporting relationships and the spans of control, really important to understand how many people does a manager oversee. And there's a whole science behind how large or small a span of control can be. In white collar jobs, people sitting at a desk, usually the span of control is pretty small, only 5, 6 people is really the most because those people are doing really detailed jobs that change every day. But in a factory, for example, the span of control can be more like 40 or 50 people because the work that the people are doing is repetitive. And so it's easier than for the manager to oversee a larger amount of people. I worked for a long time analyzing spans of control within Citibank. And it's really, as I said, an interesting science, in my opinion. You also see job titles and work responsibilities. So really important if you go to ask someone to do something for your project or initiative that you're working on. It's important to know, like, what actually are they responsible for? Is this in their job title? Is this in their work responsibility? Really helpful. And then how work is organized in functional areas. So again, if you need something done in IT, you have a name of the person who works in IT. If you need something done in HR, you have a name of someone in HR. And how work is coordinated across units and divisions, because nowadays more than ever, there are all these dotted lines and they're cross divisions. And so we really, we don't stick to our silo very often any longer. Line versus staff. And so I just wanted to make sure I got the right wording on this because it can be tricky. Line units have direct line authority, right, for conducting the major business of the organization. So that's the big thing. They have greater decision-making authority and power. Here at LMU, I'm in a line position because I'm a faculty member. And so I make decisions. I'm the head of the I'm the academic director for the master's program, for a master's program. I make a lot of decisions there. Previous in my career, I held a lot of staff positions. This is specialized. So you're, not necessarily lower level, but it's specialized expertise and services in an adversary or support capacity. I was the chief of staff to the head of engineering at Citigroup for a number of years. And that was a really cool role. So even though I wasn't making decisions all the time, I was in a key role where anything that the head of engineering did, he needed my advice pretty much. He needed to rely on me to give him information, to organize our team of 100 engineers. I was really a key role, but I was still a staff role. Staff roles are great in many ways because they're project manager roles. They really add a lot of value. But now in my point of life, I'm really pretty jazzed to be in a line position. Tall versus flat. We've briefly discussed this in class, how many organizations are moving towards more flatter structure, where there's just one manager and a handful of different people reporting to that person. It's kind of a trend, but traditionally in my parents' generation or grandparents' generation, we had a more tall structure, so a smaller span of control, but many layers of managers in between. So and also it's by culture as well. In Asia, they have more tall structures. In Northern Europe, Sweden, Denmark, very common to see more of a flat structure. So fewer layers between the top executives and the rest of the employees. Centralization versus decentralization. So, right, tall structures are more centralized. The important decisions are made by only a few people who hold positions at the top. And now in flat structures, it's decentralized. So more employees are more empowered to make decisions. And that's really why we've moved towards a flat structure in recent years, because people, the trend is to give lots of employees make them feel more empowered so that they can make decisions themselves without permission or approval. And if you have ever worked in an organization and you've been there a couple of months, you know that, yeah, actually, I would like to start making decisions myself. So that's really the trend these days. Departmentalization, how specific work groups, units are divided and coordinated. Functional departmentalization or divisional departmentalization. So functional is by skill, knowledge, and expertise. Division is by products, territories, services. And again, you'll see this very quickly. This is functional. So you'll see human resources, finance, sales, R&D. If we were looking at divisional, it would be by country, maybe by, IT or healthcare. And so this is divisional, this is by automotive, international, financial services. And so we'll see here in the next couple of slides that there's a lot of, cross integration, what's called now a matrix structure. So it uses both functional and divisional forms of departmentalization simultaneously. And this is what I see the most in my experience. So it's typical of companies that organize around projects. And that's, again, I've worked in banking, healthcare, food, consumer products, and this is really what I see the most often. So you're kind of having these dotted lines and reporting to lots of different people, and somehow it works. The most important thing, though, as I said, is to know kind of who does each role, and then knowing who to reach out to for what it is that you need on your particular project. These are circle structure. I don't see this as much, but this is more like in a startup organization where the CEO here is in the middle And then he's surrounded by his CMO and his product manager, engineering, sales people, etc. And then he has his people underneath him, but they all kind of work together. And yeah, that's kind of, I think, is more for smaller organizations. When they get larger, they have to be a little bit more disciplined, in my experience. And then we have this network structure. But honestly, I don't see this very often except for in very small startups where everybody's kind of touching everybody all at the same time. And maybe we'll move towards this in future years in larger organizations. And so that's why they include it now in organizational behavior textbooks. It wasn't in there just 3-4 years ago when I taught this course at Pepperdine, but now we're talking a little bit more about this kind of grabbing who you need for your particular project at any point in time. How do we structure to fit the environment, right? As we said earlier in this chapter, all living things must adapt and change and grow in response to their environment. The same for organizations. That's how they achieve organizational and environmental fit. Is through organizational design. Fit characterizes the extent to which an organization's vision, purpose, structure, and operations are consistent with the requirements and expectations of the environment. And organizational design is the process of aligning structure to perform the work of the organization while maintaining fit within the environment. So people spend a lot of time looking at organizational chart and strategy and structure. CEOs, they really want to make sure that they're setting up their organization to work most efficiently. And so usually at middle management level, we don't see that design, but CEO level, C-level, they spend a lot of time thinking about how all these people are going to work together. Here we have the mechanistic versus organic organizational design. So in the past, yes, things were more stable, characterized by standardization, formal policy, centralized leadership. It's also the most bureaucratic. You'll see this still very much in Asia or in Europe for sure. If you go to BMW or Mercedes, it's still somewhat like this. But organic designs are more suited towards more uncertain and volatile environments. So we see that more and more here in California, since we're the home of Silicon Valley. They act like organisms or amoebas, which are fluid and highly adaptive to their environment and changing all the time. They have fewer silos. They have a flat structure, as I said, and decentralized decision making. So a lot more people are making decisions. And exciting for sure, but sometimes hard to herd cats. So there are pros and cons to both. There's some, this is an example of, how we go from bureaucratic to adaptive organizations. So the goal is more, we have predictability, but on the other hand, we have adaptability, right? And the authority here is centralized versus decentralized. Span of control, narrow, very wide, as I mentioned already. So, okay, I'll go through all these because they're pretty exciting. Rules and procedures. There are many rules in Asia and in Europe for sure. When I worked at Credit Suisse, lots of rules. But here in the US, fewer rules. The tasks more specialized versus the tasks are now shared amongst, as I said, in startup cultures, lots of people doing lots of different things. Teams and task force, there are few. As you know, if you worked in California, many different teams typically. And coordination is here formal and impersonal versus informal and very personal. And so it's all about, bringing your whole self to the workplace. You really get to know people. And that when you form teams, then you have, a good idea, hopefully, of who you're working with. Team-based organizational design is based on dynamic networks of teams. And we talk about this here because it's becoming so much more and more popular. Strong communication, empowerment, and a rapid flow of information, right? So your generations, people in their 20s and 30s, this is very mainstream. This is all maybe. But, my generation, and definitely my parents' or grandparents' generation, it was very much a lot of top-down hierarchy, bureaucracy, silos. But now this kind of boxes and lines are less important. There's a focus on action and just getting things done and talking to the right person. And teams are built around end-to-end comparability, accountability, and leadership shows direction and enables action. What's a Scrum? Very popular. I'd say 8 out of 10. I shouldn't do the research, but probably 8 out of 10 organizations use Scrums. And even if they don't do total agile project management, which we'll go through in just a minute, the Scrum is a key part of that, and really, really nice and really important, especially when you're working in these high-paced environments. If anybody want to do their project on Agile, I definitely highly recommend it. Scrum is a set of tools, meetings, and roles that work together to help teams and structure their work. It comes from Agile methodology and encourages teams to learn from experience, self-organize for problem solving, and continuously improve by reflecting on wins and losses. And Scrum teams recognize that team members do not know everything at the beginning and will have to evolve through experience by adapting to changing conditions, right? Prioritizing and continuously learning and improving. And so what that means for me in practice is that I used to run Scrum meetings, first thing every morning, 8:30, all 30 of us would get together in a room and everybody would do a 30-second update as to what it is that they were working on that day and who it is that they needed to work with, so that it was clear how everybody needed to prioritize their day and their work. So the Scrum cycle, how that is set up, a product owner who acts as the champion for the product, often called a product manager, also sometimes called a Scrum, and then in this instance called the Scrum Master. He's the champion for the Scrum within the team, and the Scrum team itself who does the work. Then approach the script by sprinting through the Scrum cycle as shown. So they do sprint planning, a daily Scrum, as I just mentioned. Then they do a sprint review, and then they do sprint retro, which is a reflection on how things went. And this is all about coming from the product backlog, what is that needs to happen with the product. Then we have a sprint backlog. So we work through in the daily Scrum what that backlog is. In the sprint review, we here more about the increments and the demonstration. And so that's like part of the implementation piece. So as you can see, I'd say a traditional way of project management, but also a new way of managing projects. I have my project management certification for about 20 years now, and Scrum has been the latest addition to the PMP in about the last 10 years or so. So this is the most recent trend. As I said, this textbook is very fresh, hot off the presses in the last 6 months. So we talk about the most recent trends in organizational design, focused on innovation, coming right from California, flexibility and adaptability. Agile is one of the most prominent and modern designs, a set of principles originally formulated by software developers. So that's why I was kind of ahead of the trend, because I worked in software for a long time, that have now evolved into into a mindset used by all organizations to master continuous change, because as I said, we're all continuously changing in all organizations at the moment. Where self-managing and cross-functional teams are working together to solve complex problems, and they focus on rapidly and flexibly responding to change by prioritizing a constant delivery of value to the customer, right? So the customer is, the number one person who tells us kind of what our priorities are at the moment. Agile design. There's the Scrum, empowering creative functional teams. These are the guiding principles. And then the other key term for an agile design is the Kanban, the visualizing workflows and limit work in the process. So this is understanding like the big picture, right? How things are moving. And then lean development is kind of the third phase of this design, eliminating waste from the system as a whole. So making sure that we're getting rid of things that we don't need along the way and noise within the project or the product. And so the favorable conditions for adoption are if you do a Scrum, creative cultures with high level of trust, because as you can see, you're really trusting all the different levels of the organization, radical innovation teams that want to change their working environment. The Kanban is for process-oriented cultures that prefer evolutionary improvements with few prescribed practices. And lean development is really for process-oriented cultures that prefer evolutionary improvements with overarching values, but no prescribed practices. So there are three kind of versions of agile design. Another more radical form is holacracy, and it's used at Zappos. This I don't see as much. It's in a circular structure that embraces decentralizing or organizing. Zappos became very famous before this, but I'm not going to lie to you, it hasn't really caught on mainstream. We do want to let you know that it's out there in case you hear about it. And yeah, maybe 10% of organizations might use this. But as I said, it's, in my experience, not really mainstream quite yet. They allow team members to work together to achieve company goals. Instead of having predefined roles, even people self-organize to take on roles as needed. So as you can see here, it's really putting a lot of autonomy into the employee. I'm not Gen Z, I'm not even a millennial. This kind of scares me a little bit, but as we've seen, Zappos has done really well with it. And so why has Zappos done well? Because they needed a lot of creativity and innovation. And we also, all organizations need that to succeed in this world. It's the pressures on organizations to change, and flexible structures require this creativity. Are more important than ever, right? Especially with AI and so many jobs being replaced out of Southeast Asia. We find that in order for countries to move forward quickly, we have to innovate. And that creativity and innovation, right, aren't different things. Creativity is the act of conceiving something new, but innovation is the act of getting new ideas implemented into practice, right? So I think that's pretty straightforward, right? You can think of lots of ideas, but innovation is really making things that are useful. My son is very creative. He can color, he can draw, but he's not really innovating on a regular basis at 5 years old. So creativity comes from the generation that things are novel and useful, the ability to explore and do new things, it being grand or inspiring. So really great. We can do intrinsic motivation they find an activity to be interesting and challenging, self-efficacy, that we have all the ability to be creative, and pro-social motivation, the desire to expend effort to benefit other people. So, right, when we are creative, very often we're thinking of others, and we work with others, and then that creativity comes from working with others. So how can you be more creative? Because that leads to innovation. Convergent and divergent thinking. Convergent is identifying a single or most appropriate solution to a complex problem, but then divergent thinking is coming up with lots of ideas to a specific challenge. Design thinking is a systematic process for coming up with creative solutions. Design thinking uses a double diamond approach, which we'll go through in just a minute. A process of convergent and divergent thinking, as well as perspective taking, imagining what it's like to be in another person's shoes. In design thinking, this is often referred to as a customer or user or journey map, which we'll also talk about, which is a really important tool in the workplace. And here's the double diamond approach, research and design. So designing the right thing and designing things right. So as you can see, we do research about what is the right thing. And then once we have identified really what the problem is of the customer, we get insight into the problem, we scope down the focus, Then we talk about designing. So we don't want to do this first. We want to first identify what the problem is, and then we want to come up with the solution. Then we test it. We we listen for feedback, and we look at lots of different solutions. So conversion and divergent thinking. This is the customer journey map. You maybe have seen this before, especially in maybe your marketing courses. This is, before, during, and after. I won't go through this too much because this is more marketing focused, but their action, thoughts, feelings, touch points, opportunities for improvement. And you'll want to, if you're doing marketing research, this is something that you'll touch a lot. No pun intended, with touch points, but the customer journey map, how do they make decisions? What are their feelings when they buy something? Now, innovation for the last piece of this section. We have 4 more slides. Once ideas are generated and a prototype is developed, it needs to be scaled into the organization to take effect and offer value. As the stage is no longer creativity, but innovation, defined as the process through which organizations transform creative ideas into these new products, services, and operating processes, right? So as I said, my 5-year-old, he can be creative, but he can't do things like this. We have incremental innovation. And so this is where we have minor changes to products and services that help a firm stay competitive in the short term, radical innovation, and then disruptive innovation. So radical is completely new products or services, and disruptive is changes the way that all companies in an industry operate. The innovative process, discovery, ideation, prototype, development, commercialization. So I think a lot of these things are very familiar to you. I won't go through these in detail. We'll go through these more in class. I think it's an exciting process to think about. And again, it's not necessarily in the HR department that we do this. This is in the research or engineering departments. And innovation is a vital source of fit within the environment. When disruption is occurring, organization strategies that need to react to this change. And that's where HR maybe comes back into play on why it's so important. So important for you as potential HR managers to understand the importance of this. So that's it for the second section of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed that. I look forward to seeing you in class.